dawn painted the desert vermilion as Maria Littlefeather knelt beside her grandmother, grinding sage between weathered stones. The Apache camp stirred slowly, smoke rising from morning fires like prayers ascending to sky spirits. Maria's hands moved with practiced grace, filling small leather pouches with remedies that had sustained her people through countless seasons. The journey to Millerton's trading post stretched 15 miles through mesquite and shadow. Her wagon creaked along the rutted trail, loaded with woven baskets to trade for flour and salt. At the post, strangers lingered too long near the doorway, their eyes following her movements with predatory patience. The store owner's warning glance spoke volumes. 3 riders blocked the trail home, their horses forming a wall of dust and intention. The lead man's smile held no warmth. "Apache woman, you're coming with us." "Question of stolen horses needs answering." Maria's spine straightened. "I have stolen nothing. That's for Mr. Briggs to decide. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story." The riders closed in like wolves circling wounded prey, though Maria showed no weakness. The lead man, Cole, dismounted with deliberate slowness, his spurs jangling against the hard-packed earth. "Mr. Briggs runs the biggest spread in the territory. When cattle go missing and Apache tracks are found, well, he let the accusation hang in the dusty air. Your Mr. Briggs mistakes desperation for truth," Maria said, her voice steady as bedrock. "My people have taken nothing." "That's a conversation you'll have with him." Cole nodded to the others. "Tie her hands. We've got 30 miles to cover before nightfall." They bound her wrists with rough hemp rope, the fibers biting into her copper skin. Maria didn't struggle. Resistance would only feed their assumptions about Apache wildness. Instead, she held Cole's gaze until he looked away, uncomfortable with the dignity he found there. The journey to Briggs' ranch stretched through the afternoon heat. Maria memorized every landmark: the lightning-struck cottonwood, the creek running low from drought, the eagle circling overhead. Clay Morrison would need these signs. She knew it with the same certainty she knew the sun would set. 5 winters ago, he'd made a promise by the sacred springs after saving her grandmother from a flash flood. "No matter where, no matter when," he'd said, his gray eyes serious as stone. "If you need me, I'll find you." Briggs' ranch sprawled across the valley like a conquistador's claim too much, too fast, built on promises that couldn't hold. The main house rose 2 stories, painted white to blind visitors with its presumed prosperity. Jack Briggs waited on the porch, a man who wore authority like an ill-fitting coat, always tugging at the seams. "So this is our horse thief," he said, descending the steps. He circled Maria like she was livestock at auction. "You'll stay until you tell us where your people hide our cattle?" "I cannot confess to lies." Briggs's face darkened. "Cole, tie her to the fence post. No food until she remembers the truth." As they secured her to the rough-hewn post, Maria caught the eye of a young ranch hand watching from the bunkhouse. Something flickered in his expression: doubt, perhaps, or shame. The sun began its descent, painting the sky the color of blood and promises. Through a gap in the barn's siding, Maria found the North Star beginning its nightly vigil. "Clay," she whispered, his name both prayer and certainty. Clay Morrison woke in his line shack with his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. The pre-dawn darkness pressed against the windows, but something deeper than night had stirred him. He'd felt this sensation only once before, 5 winters past, the day Maria's grandmother had been caught in that flash flood. His chest tightened with the same urgency now, a pull stronger than logic or reason. He saddled his paint horse by lantern light, checking his supplies with methodical precision: sourdough starter, coffee, ammunition he prayed he'd never use. The 30-mile ride to Maria's camp took him through territory he knew like the lines on his palms. Each hoofbeat drummed the same rhythm: something's wrong, something's wrong. The Apache camp lay still as death, too still. No smoke rose from cooking fires, No dogs barked at his approach. Clay dismounted at Maria's wickiup, finding the entrance flap thrown back carelessly. Inside, her grandmother's medicine bundle sat abandoned, herbs scattered across woven mats, but there placed deliberately on the center pole hung a broken eagle feather, its shaft snapped clean through. "Maria," he breathed, understanding the message. "Danger. Taken. Come find me." Clay knelt in the dust outside, reading the story written in tracks. 3 horses, maybe 4. Boot prints with sharp heels, not Apache moccasins. A wagon's ruts leading toward Millerton. They'd taken her yesterday morning, judging by the wind's work on the prints. His jaw set hard as granite. Someone had stolen what was under his protection. The memory rose unbidden as he rode toward town. That winter day when the sky had opened without warning, turning dry washes into raging torrents. He'd been checking fence lines when he heard the old woman's cries. Elena Littlefeather, Maria's grandmother, clinging to a cottonwood branch as water roared around her. He'd roped her out, nearly losing his horse in the process. Maria had appeared as they reached safe ground, her face transformed by relief and gratitude. They'd sat by the sacred hot springs afterward, steam rising around them like spirits. Maria had taken his hands in hers, her touch warm as the mineral water. "You saved the keeper of our memories," she'd said. "My grandmother holds our people's stories, their medicine, their songs." "Anyone would have done the same," Clay had replied, though he knew it wasn't true. Plenty of men would have ridden past an Apache elder in distress. "You see people, not enemies," Maria had said. "That is rare among your kind or mine." She'd paused then, her dark eyes serious. "I want to make you a promise, as you've made one to me without words. We are bound now, Clay Morrison. If you need me, I will know. If I need you, you will feel it. No matter where," he'd said, understanding the weight of such words. No matter when. The memory faded as Millerton's ramshackle buildings appeared through the morning haze. The trading post stood closed, but old Sam's saloon never truly shut. Clay pushed through the doors to find Sam wiping down glasses with a rag that had seen better decades. "Morrison," Sam acknowledged. "You're up early or out late?" "Looking for information." Clay laid a silver dollar on the scarred bar. "Apache woman came through yesterday, Maria Littlefeather. Who took her?" Sam's weathered face creased with worry. "You don't want that trouble, son." "Already got it." "Who?" "Cole Hayward and 2 of Briggs's men." Sam leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "They claimed she stole horses, but everyone knows Briggs wants that Apache water rights territory. He's been pressuring them for months." Clay's hands tightened on the bar's edge. Jack Briggs, he'd heard the name attached to shady land deals and forged documents. A man who'd built an empire on other people's misery. "They took her to his ranch?" Clay asked, though he already knew the answer. 30 miles west. "But Clay," Sam caught his sleeve, "Briggs has 6, maybe 7 men. You can't shoot your way through that." "Don't intend to shoot anyone." Clay turned toward the door, then paused. "Sam, if Marshal Watson comes through, tell him he might want to check on some suspicious land claims out at Briggs' ranch." "You think he'll listen?" "Rosa Martinez works in Briggs's kitchen. Her husband rides with the marshal sometimes." "Word travels." Outside, Clay mounted his horse and checked his father's compass, though he knew the way. The brass caught the morning light as he aligned his course. Briggs' ranch lay west, but more importantly, Maria waited there. The promise made by sacred springs pulled him forward like an invisible rope. As he rode, Clay considered his approach. Violence would only confirm their prejudices about Apache and those who defended them. But moral authority, that was something men like Briggs never expected. They understood force and fear, but patient righteousness confused them, made them stumble. He'd arrive at dawn tomorrow if he pushed through the night. By then, Maria would have been captive for 2 days. Clay touched the pocket watch in his vest, his father's final gift. "Sometimes, son," the old man had said, "the strongest thing you can do is stand still and let wrong reveal itself." The trail stretched ahead through sage and shadow, somewhere beyond those miles. Maria waited with the patience of her people, trusting in promises made and kept. Clay urged his horse forward, carrying neither hatred nor vengeance, only the quiet determination of a man who knew exactly where he belonged and why. The broken eagle feather stayed in his shirt pocket, close to his heart, a reminder that some bonds transcended law, race, or reason. He'd made a promise by sacred water. Now came the keeping of it. Clay Morrison bellied down on the ridge overlooking Briggs Ranch as the first stars began to fade from the pre-dawn sky. Through his army field glasses, a relic from his father's service, he studied the compound spread below like a general surveying a battlefield. The main house squatted white and presumptuous in the center, surrounded by a bunkhouse, barn, and various outbuildings. And there, tied to a fence post near the stock pen, was Maria. Even from this distance, he could see her dignity intact. She stood straight despite having been bound standing for over a day, her head high, her stillness not defeat but deliberate conservation of strength. Clay's chest tightened at the sight, but he forced himself to continue his reconnaissance methodically. Emotion would serve neither of them now. 6 men. He counted them as they began their morning routines. Cole Hayward emerged from the bunkhouse first, stretching and spitting tobacco juice into the dust. 2 younger hands followed, one barely out of his teens with sandy hair, the other stockier and moving with the careful steps of a man nursing a hangover. From the main house came Briggs himself, already dressed in his town clothes like he was playing at being a gentleman rancher. The foreman, Wade, appeared from the barn, and finally a 6th man Clay didn't recognize stepped out to relieve himself against a fence post. Clay watched their patterns, noting who was armed, who seemed reluctant, who moved with cruel purpose. The young sandy-haired one, Tommy. He heard someone call, kept glancing toward Maria, with something like shame in his posture. When he brought her water around midday yesterday, he'd lingered, seeming to want to speak. Interesting. The Mexican cook, Rosa, emerged from the kitchen door carrying a bucket of scraps for the chickens. She too looked toward Maria, and Clay saw her lips moving in what might have been prayer. Another potential ally. Perhaps, in his experience, cruelty was rarely unanimous. There were always cracks in such foundations, places where conscience might take root. As the sun climbed higher, Clay shifted position to observe Maria more closely. That's when he saw it, her foot tapping against the fence post in a pattern he recognized. 3 quick, 3 slow, 3 quick. Their old signal from the times they'd met at the trading post or the springs. I am well. I wait. She knew he was near. Somehow, she knew. Briggs strode out to Maria after the breakfast hour, his voice carrying up to Clay's position. "Still not ready to tell us where your people took our cattle?" Maria's response was silence. "You think someone's coming for you?" Briggs laughed, ugly and sharp. "Nobody cares about one Apache woman. You could die at that post and the world would keep spinning." "Men who speak of death so easily," Maria finally said, her voice clear despite her thirst, "have never truly faced it." Briggs raised his hand as if to strike her, then lowered it, perhaps remembering he had an audience in his own men. "By tomorrow, you'll beg to tell me everything." After Briggs retreated to the house, Clay watched Tommy approach Maria again with water. This time, the young man spoke, his words too quiet to hear, but Maria nodded slightly. Tommy glanced around nervously, then quickly cut a small piece of rope from her bindings, not enough to free her, but enough to ease the circulation to her hands. The boy had a conscience fighting to surface. Clay spent the afternoon gathering what he needed from his saddlebags and a nearby abandoned homestead he'd passed. Not weapons, he had those, but didn't intend to use them. Instead, he collected other things: a clean shirt, his father's Bible, though he wasn't particularly religious, official-looking papers from the homestead that might pass for legal documents at a glance, props for the performance he was planning. As evening approached, he watched the ranch's rhythm: dinner at sunset, card game in the bunkhouse after, Briggs retiring early to his house with a bottle. The guard rotation, such as it was, began around 10, though by midnight the man on duty was usually dozing against the barn wall. Clay made his preparations in the darkness. He picketed his horse in a draw a quarter-mile from the ranch, close enough to reach quickly but far enough to avoid detection. He cleaned the dust from his clothes and boots, shaved by touch with cold water from his canteen. If he was going to face these men with nothing but moral authority, he needed to look like someone who had it. The night deepened, and Clay found himself thinking about the nature of courage. His father had fought in the war between the states, had seen real battles with thousands dead. "The bravest thing I ever saw," the old man had told him once, "was a chaplain walking across a field during a bombardment to give last rites to a dying enemy soldier. No weapon, no cover, just faith that his purpose was righteous enough to see him through." Clay wasn't sure about faith, but he understood purpose. His purpose waited at that fence post, patient as stone. He dozed fitfully, waking every hour to check the stars' progress across the sky. At 3 in the morning, he rose and prepared his final approach. This was the crucial time, late enough that the guard would be drowsy, early enough that the cook wouldn't have started breakfast. Moving down from the ridge, Clay paused to observe Maria once more through the field glasses. She was slumped now, exhaustion finally taking its toll, but her foot still moved slightly. Still that pattern. Still, "I am well. I wait." He thought about the 6 men below. In a dime novel, the hero would burst in with guns blazing, shooting the villains and riding off with the girl. But life wasn't a dime novel, and real courage was more complex than that. Anyone could pull a trigger. It took true strength to achieve justice without becoming the very thing you fought against. Clay checked his father's pocket watch. 4:30. Dawn would break in an hour. He'd walk in with the sun at his back, calm as a man arriving for a business meeting. He'd speak only truth, make no threats he wouldn't keep, and offer these men something they didn't expect a chance to choose better. The plan was dangerous in its simplicity. He was betting that conscience, given room to breathe, was stronger than fear. That dignity in the face of cruelty was its own form of power. That a man standing for what's right could face down 6 men standing for what's profitable. If he was wrong, both he and Maria would likely die at that ranch. But Clay had learned something in his years riding the territory. Most men wanted to think of themselves as good. Even bad men told themselves stories to justify their actions. If you could interrupt that story, make them see themselves clearly, sometimes that was enough to change everything. He began his final descent toward the ranch as the eastern sky showed the faintest hint of gray. Behind him on the ridge, a coyote howled lonely, defiant, free. Clay took it as a good omen. He'd need all the luck he could get. But more than that, he'd need the kind of calm certainty that made other men doubt their own convictions. The fence post where Maria waited grew clearer in the gathering light. Clay touched the broken eagle feather in his pocket one last time, then let his hand fall empty to his side. He wouldn't need weapons for this. He had something more powerful, a promise to keep, and the will to keep it without compromising who he was. The ranch began to stir. Clay Morrison walked forward to meet the dawn. Clay Morrison emerged from the sagebrush as the sun broke the horizon, painting his silhouette long and dark across the dusty ground. He rode slowly, deliberately, his paint horse's hooves striking the earth in a measured rhythm that announced his arrival like a drummer preceding a funeral. The guard who'd been dozing against the barn scrambled for his rifle, then froze as Clay raised one empty hand in greeting, the other holding his reins loose and easy. "Morning," Clay called out, his voice carrying across the compound with the clarity of church bells. "I'm here to speak with Mr. Briggs about property that doesn't belong to him." The commotion was immediate. Men poured from the bunkhouse, some still in their union suits, others struggling into boots. Cole Hayward emerged with his gun already drawn, though he kept it pointed at the ground. Briggs himself appeared on his porch, dressed in a silk robe that looked ridiculous in the harsh morning light. Clay dismounted with theatrical slowness, every movement broadcasting his lack of fear. He walked past the armed men without acknowledging their weapons, his eyes fixed on Maria. She lifted her head, and their gazes met across the 20 yards that separated them. Something passed between them, not words, not even a smile, just recognition. I'm here. I see you. We're going to get through this. You're trespassing, Briggs snarled, descending his porch steps. Turn around and ride out, or we'll bury you where you stand. Clay finally turned to face him, his expression mild as milk. Jack Briggs, I've heard about you. Man who files interesting paperwork at the land office. Man who finds cattle missing whenever he wants something that isn't his. He pulled out his father's pocket watch, checking the time with elaborate casualness. 6:15 in the morning, sun's up, good time for truth-telling. Who the hell are you? Cole demanded, his gun hand twitching. Clay Morrison, line rider, when there's work, friend to those who deserve it, and right now, a man come to collect what's his. He nodded toward Maria. You're holding something that doesn't belong to you. Briggs laughed, harsh and disbelieving. That Apache thief, she belongs to whoever catches her stealing. Funny thing about stealing, Clay said, pulling out the papers he'd prepared. Requires proof, evidence, maybe even a witness or two who isn't on your payroll. He unfolded the documents slowly, though they were mostly old surveying records from the abandoned homestead. I've been doing some reading about your land claims, Mr. Briggs. Amazing how many of them overlap with Apache water rights. Tommy, the young sandy-haired ranch hand, stepped out of the cluster of men. His eyes darted between Clay and Maria, conscience warring with fear on his freckled face. Mr. Briggs said she stole horses, he offered weakly. Did you see her steal horses, son? Clay asked gently, his tone that of a patient schoolmaster. Or did someone tell you she stole horses after they needed a reason to take her? Tommy's silence spoke volumes. Behind him, the Mexican cook Rosa had emerged from the kitchen, a pan still in her hand, her dark eyes taking in the scene with keen intelligence. This is ridiculous, Briggs spat. Cole, remove this man from my property. Cole took a step forward, but Clay held up his hand. Before you do something, you'll need to explain to a judge. You should know that Marshal Watson received an interesting message yesterday about forged land documents and false imprisonment. He's probably a day behind me, maybe less if he rode through the night. It was mostly bluff. Clay had only suggested Sam might contact the marshal, but he saw the effect ripple through the assembled men. The unnamed sixth man Clay had observed yesterday took a small step backward. Wade, the foreman, frowned deeply. You're lying, Briggs said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. Maybe, Clay agreed easily. Or maybe Rosa's husband mentioned something when he rode with the marshal's posse last month. Maybe people in Millerton are tired of Apache being blamed every time you want more land. Maybe, he looked directly at Tommy, some of your own men are tired of becoming the kind of people their mothers would be ashamed of. Tommy flinched as if slapped. His hand moved to his chest, where Clay could see the outline of something beneath his shirt, a cross, perhaps, or a locket. My sister, Tommy said suddenly, his voice cracking. My sister married an Apache man. Good man. Works hard, never troubles anybody. But folks like... He stopped, swallowing hard, then continued. She used to be Apache herself, before the mission school, before they made her forget. The revelation hung in the morning air like smoke from a distant fire. Clay saw the moment's power and pressed it. How old's your sister? Tommy. 22. About Maria's age then. Same black hair. I'd bet. Same pride even when the world tries to break it. Clay walked closer to the fence post, still ignoring the guns. Same dignity when tied to a post like an animal for crimes she didn't commit. Tommy's face crumpled. He looked at Maria, really looked at her for the first time, and saw not an Apache thief, but someone's daughter, someone's sister. His hand moved to his knife. Don't you dare, Cole warned. But his heart wasn't in it. The moral ground was shifting beneath all their feet. I'm done with this, Tommy declared, his voice stronger now. He walked to Maria, pulling out his knife. "This ain't right. We all know it ain't right." "You cut her loose. You're finished here," Briggs threatened. "Then I'm finished." Tommy sawed at the ropes binding Maria's wrists. "My mother didn't raise me to torment women. Any women." As the ropes fell away, Maria swayed but didn't fall. Clay was there, not touching her that would be improper and give Briggs ammunition, but close enough that she could lean on him if needed. She didn't. Instead, she stood on her own strength, rubbing her wrists and looking at each man in turn. "The truth needs no force," she said, her voice hoarse but clear. "It only needs one person brave enough to speak it." She looked at Tommy. "Your sister is lucky to have you." Rosa stepped forward then, her courage perhaps sparked by Tommy's. "I bring water," she announced, daring anyone to stop her. "And food. No one should stand 2 days without food, not even criminals. And this woman is no criminal." She bustled past the men with her pan, which Clay now saw contained fresh tortillas. The domestic normalcy of her movements made the situation's cruelty even more apparent. As she gave Maria water from a clay jug, she murmured something in Spanish that sounded like a prayer or a blessing. "This is still my land," Briggs said, but his empire was crumbling. 2 of his men were helping the woman he'd imprisoned. The others looked uncomfortable, avoiding his gaze. "Your land." Clay pulled out another paper. This one actually legitimate a surveyor's map he'd acquired months ago. "According to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo and subsequent territorial agreements, the springs on the eastern border of what you claim belong to the Apache by right of traditional use. You've been stealing their water for 3 years. Wade, the foreman, studied the map over Clay's shoulder. His weathered face grew thoughtful. "That true, Mr. Briggs. We've been taking Apache water." "Don't be ridiculous," Briggs blustered, but guilt painted his face red as sunrise. "I got family who are Apache," Wade said slowly. "Cousins. Through my mother's side. We don't talk about it much, but blood is blood." He looked at Maria, then at Clay. "If what you're saying is true, if we've been stealing water and blaming them for missing cattle that probably just wandered off or died in the drought—" "The cattle you found last month," Tommy interrupted, excited now. "Remember. Wade, they were in that box canyon. Been there for weeks. Nothing stolen about them. Just lost." The truth was building its own momentum now, rolling through the ranch like a flash flood. Clay saw the moment to press his advantage. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice carrying the authority of righteousness. "Maria's going to get on her horse and ride out of here. I'm going with her. You men are going to decide whether you want to be part of Briggs's lies or whether you want to look at yourselves in the mirror tomorrow. And when Marshal Watson arrives, because he will arrive, you're going to tell him the truth. You can't just—" Briggs started. "I can and I will." Clay interrupted. "Unless you want to shoot an unarmed man in front of witnesses who are already questioning whether they want to work for a liar and a thief. Unless you want to explain to the marshal why you held an innocent woman for 2 days. Unless you want your whole house of cards to come tumbling down today instead of next week." The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Cole still held his gun, but his grip had loosened. The other men had already chosen their side through their inaction. Even the morning birds had stopped singing, as if nature itself waited to see how this would resolve. Finally, Rosa broke the silence with practical wisdom. "The horses," she said. "Someone needs to bring the lady's horse. She cannot walk so far after such treatment." It was Tommy who moved first, heading to the barn with quick, determined strides. The spell was broken. Maria's ordeal was ending not with violence, but with the quiet victory of conscience over corruption. Clay allowed himself one small smile as he watched Briggs's face cycle through rage, disbelief, and finally the dawning realization that his power had limits. Truth, it turned out, was stronger than fear. It just needed someone willing to stand up and speak it. The sun climbed toward its zenith, turning the ranch yard into a furnace of dust and tension. Clay Morrison stood in the same spot he'd claimed at dawn, his boots planted firm as fence posts. sweat darkening his shirt but his expression unchanging. Maria sat in the shade Rosa had insisted on creating with a stretched canvas, sipping water slowly, regaining strength with each passing hour. The standoff had evolved into something more complex than confrontation. It had become a test of wills, with truth as the stakes. Briggs paced his porch like a caged mountain cat, his silk robe long since exchanged for his usual pretense of gentleman's clothing. Every few minutes he'd bark an order that no one followed, his authority evaporating like morning dew under the harsh sun. His men had drifted into small groups, talking in low voices, their loyalty fragmenting with each revelation Clay carefully laid before them. "You know," Clay said, addressing Wade but speaking loud enough for all to hear, "I found something interesting at the land office last month. Seems Mr. Briggs here filed his claim to this ranch using papers from a dead man. Benjamin Holbrook died of fever in Santa Fe 3 years back. Funny how a dead man's signature appeared on documents dated 6 months after his burial." Wade's weathered face darkened. "That true, Mr. Briggs?" "Don't listen to this drifter," Briggs snapped, but his denial rang hollow as a dried gourd. Clay pulled out another paper, this one bearing an official seal he'd traced from a legitimate document. "Death certificate, public record. Anyone can check it." He paused, letting the implications sink in. Makes a man wonder what else might be forged. Employment contracts, maybe promises about wages and bonuses that never seemed to come. The stocky ranch hand who'd been nursing yesterday's hangover, Hank, Clay had learned, suddenly spoke up. "That why my pay's been short 3 months running, because the whole operation's built on lies." "Your pay's short because you drink it away," Cole said, but his defense of Briggs lacked conviction. "I drink because I can't stand what we do here," Hank shot back. "Pushing families off their land, burning out homesteaders who won't sell, and now this tying up women like they're animals." Tommy returned from feeding the horses, his young face set with newfound determination. He walked directly to Clay, pulling something from his pocket, a worn piece of paper. "Found this in Mr. Briggs's office last week when I was cleaning. Didn't mean nothing to me then, but now—" He handed it to Clay. Clay studied the document, his eyebrows rising. "Bill of sale for 50 head of cattle to a buyer in Mexico. Dated 2 weeks ago." He looked at Briggs. "The same cattle you claimed Maria's people stole." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a prairie fire. Briggs's face went from red to white, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Cole lowered his gun completely, staring at his employer with dawning comprehension. "You sold them yourself," Wade said slowly. "Then blamed the Apache so you could take their water rights as compensation for your losses." "It's more than that," Clay continued, his voice gaining strength. "I stopped at Fort Sumner on my way here. Interesting stories there about a man matching Mr. Briggs's description. Something about deserting from the cavalry, taking supplies meant for Apache reservations. Something about brass buttons from a uniform that might still be hidden somewhere on this ranch." Rosa, who had been listening while preparing food, suddenly crossed herself. "The trunk," she whispered. "In the attic. I clean everywhere. And there is a trunk with soldiers' clothes. I thought perhaps Mr. Briggs bought them, but—" "Desertion during wartime," Wade said, his voice heavy with disgust. "That's a hanging offense." Briggs stumbled backward, his facade finally crumbling entirely. "You don't understand. I built something here. I made this land profitable. These savages don't know how to use it properly." "These savages." Maria spoke for the first time in hours, her voice cutting through his excuses like a blade through butter. "Have lived on this land for generations without destroying it. We take what we need, no more. You take everything and call it progress." Clay walked to Maria's side, still maintaining propriety, but making his allegiance clear. "The truth needs no force." He repeated her earlier words. "It just needs light to shine on it." Tommy stepped forward again, this time addressing the other ranch hands. "We got a choice here. We can keep working for a liar and a thief, Or we can walk away clean. I know what my sister would want me to choose. I know what's right. One by one, the ranch hands began to declare themselves. Hank threw his hat in the dust at Briggs's feet. I'm done. My mother didn't raise me to torment women and steal from families. Another hand, silent until now, spat tobacco juice and said, Apache saved my brother's life once. Found him half dead from snakebite. They didn't have to help a white man, but they did. And this is how we repay them. Even Cole was wavering. He looked at the gun in his hand as if seeing it for the first time, then slowly holstered it. Mr. Briggs, if what Morrison's saying is true, Clay laughed, but not unkindly. Son, you know it's true. You've probably suspected for months. How many times have you been asked to do something that didn't sit right? How many times have you told yourself it was just business? Cole's shoulders sagged. Too many. Wade made the final break. As foreman, his word carried weight with the men. I've worked this land for 2 years, he said slowly. Thought I was building something good, but if it's built on lies and theft, then it's no better than a house of cards. He looked at Maria, then at Clay. The Apache woman goes free. No one here will stop her. This is mutiny, Briggs shrieked, his composure completely shattered. I own you. I own all of you. You own nothing, Clay said quietly. Maybe you never did. A man who has to steal what he has never really possesses it. It possesses him. Rosa approached Maria with a cloth bundle. Food for your journey, she said softly. And something else. She pulled out a small wooden cross. My grandmother's. For protection. You remind me of her strong, patient, wise. Maria accepted the gift with grace, touching Rosa's hand gently. Your kindness will not be forgotten. Tommy brought Maria's horse, saddled and ready. As she stood to mount, she swayed slightly, the 2 days of captivity having taken their toll. Clay steadied her with a hand at her elbow, brief and proper, but the contact sent something electric through both of them. I knew you would come, she said quietly, for his ears alone. You knew because I promised, he replied. She mounted her horse with dignity despite her exhaustion. Looking down at the assembled men, she spoke with quiet authority. You have a choice now. You can continue to follow a man who builds his empire on lies, or you can choose truth. Remember, what you do in the coming days will echo through your lives. Choose wisely. Wade stepped forward. Ma'am, I speak for most of us when I say we're sorry. This never should have happened. Apologies are words, Maria replied. Actions are truth. Show you're sorry through what you do next. Clay mounted his own horse, positioning himself beside Maria. He looked at the assembled ranch hands one more time. When Marshal Watson arrives, and he will arrive, tell him the truth, all of it, about the forged documents, the false accusations, the sold cattle. Let justice run its course. You can't leave, Briggs shouted. But he stood alone now, his men having stepped away from him like he carried plague. This isn't over. Yes, Clay said simply. It is. As they rode out, Clay heard Tommy call after them. Mr. Morrison, will you tell her people that not all of us are like him? Clay turned in his saddle. They already know, son. Why do you think they've been so patient? They're waiting for us to remember who we're supposed to be. The ranch fell away behind them as they rode into the afternoon heat. Clay could feel the eyes of the men on their backs, some ashamed, some relieved, all changed by what they'd witnessed. Truth, he reflected, was like water. It found every crack, every weakness in a lie's foundation, and eventually, it wore everything false away, beside him. Maria rode straight and proud despite her ordeal. The sun caught the silver threads in her hair ornaments, the ones they'd returned to her along with her dignity. She began to hum something, an Apache song he'd heard once at the springs, about water returning to the earth and truth returning to the people. Your grandmother will be worried, Clay said. She knew you would come for me. Maria replied. She dreamed it the night I was taken. She's probably preparing a feast right now. I don't need a feast. Maria looked at him, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. No, you need only what you've already received, the keeping of a promise. Behind them, the Briggs ranch was already beginning its collapse. They could hear shouting Briggs's voice, high and desperate, the men's voices firm with newfound resolve. By tomorrow, the ranch would likely be empty, its hands scattered to find honest work, its owner facing justice he'd long avoided. But Clay and Maria didn't look back. They rode toward the eastern hills where the sacred springs waited, where truth ran clear and promises were kept. The sun was beginning its descent, painting their shadows long before them. Two figures merged into one dark shape against the golden grass, separate but together, free but bound, riding toward home. Night descended on the Briggs ranch like a shroud, bringing with it a reckoning that had been building since dawn. Clay and Maria had made camp 5 miles east, close enough to observe any pursuit but far enough to rest safely. They built no fire, the moonlight was sufficient, and they had no desire to advertise their position. Around them, the desert came alive with its nocturnal symphony, coyotes calling across the valleys, owls hunting in near silence, the rustle of small creatures in the sage. You should sleep, Clay said, watching Maria massage her wrists where the rope had left dark bruises. Sleep feels like another world, she replied, her voice soft in the darkness. My body is here, but my spirit is still tied to that post, waiting. She paused, looking at the stars. How did you know to come? Same way you knew I would. Clay pulled off his jacket and offered it to her against the cooling air. Felt it in my bones. Woke up like someone had shouted my name. She accepted the jacket, wrapping it around her shoulders. My grandmother says some bonds are written in the stars before we're born. We just spend our lives finding them. Back at the ranch, Jack Briggs stood alone in his office, pouring whiskey with shaking hands. His empire was collapsing faster than a house built on sand. Wade had just informed him that 5 of the 6 ranch hands were leaving at first light. Only Cole remained, and even he seemed more interested in protecting himself than his employer. They can't just leave, Briggs muttered to the empty room. I have contracts. But the contracts, like everything else in his life, were built on deception. Forged signatures, false promises, stolen authority, it was all unraveling now that Clay Morrison had pulled the first thread. In the bunkhouse, the men sat around a lamp's amber glow, their voices low but firm with resolution. Tommy was packing his few belongings, his young face set with determination. Where will you go? Hank asked. To my sister first. Tell her what happened here. Then maybe up to Colorado. Heard there's honest work in the silver mines. Tommy folded a shirt carefully. What about you? Got a cousin runs cattle near Amarillo. Real cattle, not stolen ones. Hank spat tobacco juice into a tin cup. Been meaning to write him for months. Wade sat apart slightly, older and more weathered than the others, the weight of his foreman's role sitting heavy on his shoulders. I should have seen it sooner. All the signs were there. We all should have, Cole said from the doorway. He'd been standing there for several minutes, listening. But we didn't want to. Easier to follow orders than think about what they meant. You staying with him? Wade asked. Cole shook his head slowly. Can't. Not after today. Seeing that woman tied up like that, dignified as a queen despite it all. Ann Morrison, walking in here without a gun drawn, using nothing but truth as his weapon. He laughed bitterly. Made us all look like cowards. Outside, Rosa Martinez stood in her kitchen garden, the one she'd tended despite Briggs's complaints about wasting water on vegetables. She held her rosary, praying for Maria's safe journey home and for the men whose consciences were finally awakening. Her husband would return from his trip with the marshal's posse tomorrow. She had much to tell him. Back at their camp, Clay and Maria sat in comfortable silence, sharing the cold biscuits and dried meat from their saddlebags. The moon rose full and bright, turning the desert silver. Tell me about your grandmother's dream, Clay said. Maria smiled slightly. She saw you walking through fire, but the flames didn't burn you. She saw me as an eagle, circling overhead, waiting for the smoke to clear. When it did, we were both standing by the sacred springs. Fire, Clay frowned. There was no fire. Wasn't there? Maria looked at him directly. What do you call what happened today Briggs's lies? Burning away in the light of truth, his men, walking through the flames of their conscience, you, standing in the center of it all. Unburned because your cause was just... Clay considered this, remembering his father's stories about metaphor and meaning. Things the old man had learned from books Clay had never had patience for. Your grandmother sees deep. She sees true. There's a difference. Maria pulled Clay's jacket closer around her. She also said something else. She said the man who came for me would need to decide something important. Not about me, but about himself. What kind of decision? Whether to keep riding alone or build something that lasts. The words hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Clay had been a solitary man for so long, moving from job to job, place to place, carrying only what fit in his saddlebags. But today had shown him something, the power of standing for something larger than himself, of being part of a community, even if that community was just two people keeping promises. At the ranch, Briggs made a desperate decision. He went to his safe, pulling out what cash remained, stuffing it into saddlebags. If the marshal was really coming, if his desertion from the cavalry was about to be exposed, he needed to run. Mexico, maybe, or California. Somewhere his past couldn't follow. Cole watched from the shadows as his employer prepared to flee. Part of him thought about the wages Briggs owed them all, about taking what was rightfully theirs. But he remembered Maria's words about choosing wisely, about actions echoing through lives. He let Briggs go. The man's punishment would come from running itself, always looking over his shoulder, never able to build anything real because it would all be founded on the same lies. Tommy couldn't sleep. He stood outside the bunkhouse, looking at the fence post where Maria had been tied. In the moonlight, he could see the grooves where the rope had worn into the wood. He walked over and touched them, feeling the shame burn fresh in his chest. Can't undo it, Wade said, joining him. Can only do better going forward. She forgave us. How could she forgive us? Wade considered the question. Maybe because she understands something we're just learning. Hatred's a poison you drink hoping others will die from it. She chose not to drink. Miles away, Clay and Maria finally spoke of what needed speaking. I've been alone a long time, Clay said, his voice quiet but clear. Thought it was easier that way. No one to worry about, no one to fail, but no one to share the sunrise with either, Maria added. No one to know your true name, my true name, the one written in those stars my grandmother talks about. The name that says who you really are, not just what you're called. She turned to face him fully. Today I learned your true name. It's Promise Keeper. It's Truth Speaker. It's Man Who Stands. Clay felt something shift in his chest, like a door opening that had been locked for years. And yours, woman who waits but is not weak, keeper of wisdom, bridge between worlds, she smiled. We have many names, Clay Morrison. Maybe it's time we chose which ones to live by. A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another, then another, until the desert rang with their chorus. It sounded like laughter, like celebration, like the earth itself acknowledging something significant. Your grandmother, Clay said slowly. Would she accept a white man at her fire, not as a visitor, but as family? She would accept a good man regardless of his color. She judges by actions, not appearances. Maria paused. But Clay, that's not the question you're really asking. No, he admitted. It's not. Then ask it. Clay looked at the stars, at the moon, at the silver desert stretching endless around them. Then he looked at Maria, still wrapped in his jacket, her face serene despite everything she'd endured. When this is over, when the marshal has come and justice is done, when your people are safe on their land with their water rights secured, he took a breath. Would you let me stay, not just visit, but stay, help build something that lasts? Maria's answer came without hesitation. I would not let you. I would ask you. There's a difference. She reached out and touched his hand, brief but electric. We need bridge builders. People who can stand between worlds and speak truth to both. Today you showed you could be that. They sat in silence again. But it was different now. Not the silence of things unspoken, but of things understood. The desert around them pulsed with life, with possibility, with the ancient rhythm of promises kept and new ones being born. Back at the ranch, the last lamp was extinguished. Briggs was gone, fled into the night with whatever he could carry. The men slept fitfully, preparing for tomorrow's exodus and testimony. Rosa prayed one last time, then closed her eyes, knowing she'd done right. And 5 miles east, 2 figures sat beneath the stars, no longer alone, no longer separate, but not yet together, waiting for dawn, for justice, for the moment when promises could become plans and plans could become a future. The moon traced its path across the sky, marking time until morning would bring the marshal, bring consequences, bring change. But for now, in this suspended moment between what was and what would be, Clay Morrison and Maria Littlefeather sat in perfect understanding, knowing that some bonds, once recognized, could never be broken. The desert whispered its approval, and the stars continued their eternal dance, writing new names in the sky. Dawn broke over the desert with spectacular grandeur, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that seemed to herald more than just another day. Clay and Maria had ridden through the night, reaching the outskirts of Briggs Ranch as the first light touched the eastern mountains. They positioned themselves on the same ridge where Clay had first surveyed the situation, watching as the ranch stirred to life below, though it was a very different awakening than the previous morning. The bunkhouse door opened, and Tommy emerged carrying his belongings in a canvas sack. Wade followed, then Hank, then the others. They moved with purpose but without haste. Men who had made a decision and would see it through. At the main house, no smoke rose from the chimney. Briggs's horse was gone from the stable, his flight confirmed by the scattered papers visible through his office window. He ran, Maria observed, her voice neutral as morning air. Let him run. Clay replied. A man fleeing justice carries his own prison with him. They descended toward the ranch as the men gathered in the yard. Cole stood apart, his hand resting on his gun belt, not threatening, just habitual. When he saw Clay and Maria approaching, he removed the belt entirely, setting it on a fence post. Came back to see it through, Wade asked, no surprise in his voice. Came back to make sure truth gets told, Clay said, dismounting. He helped Maria down, noting how she moved easier this morning, strength returning with freedom. Marshall should be here soon. Briggs lit out around 3, Cole reported. Took what cash he had, left everything else, even left the deed to the ranch. Though I doubt it's worth the paper it's written on if it's forged like you say. Rosa emerged from the kitchen, her face lighting up when she saw Maria. You are well, you rested. I am free. Maria answered. That is its own rest. The sound of horses approaching drew their attention. Marshal Watson rode in with 3 deputies, their badges catching the morning sun. Rosa's husband Miguel rode with them, his face grim with purpose. The marshal was an older man, gray-bearded and steady-eyed, the kind who'd seen enough of human nature to be surprised by nothing but disappointed by much. Morrison, he greeted Clay with a nod. Got some interesting messages about this place. Seems we need to have some conversations. These men have things to tell you, Clay said, gesturing to the ranch hands. About Briggs, about what he's been doing, about what happened here. Wade stepped forward first, shoulders squared like a man approaching confession. Marshal, I've been foreman here 2 years. I've seen things, done things I'm not proud of, but yesterday opened my eyes to just how deep the corruption went. Tell me. Watson said simply, dismounting and pulling out a leather notebook. The story poured out like water through a broken dam. Wade told about the forged documents, the intimidation of homesteaders, the false accusations against the Apache. Tommy, finding courage in confession, admitted to helping plant evidence of stolen horses near Apache camps. Cole revealed the sold cattle, the scheme to claim them stolen for insurance money and justification to seize water rights. And the woman, Watson asked, looking at Maria. You were held here against your will. Maria stood with quiet dignity. For 2 days, tied to that post. She pointed to the fence. Accused of crimes that existed only in Jack Briggs's greed. The marshal examined the post, noting the rope marks worn into the wood. His face darkened. False imprisonment, attempted fraud, conspiracy to deprive citizens of their legal rights. He looked at his deputies. Check the house. Gather any documents you can find. Rosa stepped forward, wringing her hands. Marshal Watson, there is more. In the attic. A trunk with soldier clothes. Mr. Briggs. He sometimes wore the buttons on his vest. Cavalry buttons. Watson's eyebrows rose. Desertion. From Fort Union, probably during the Apache conflicts. Clay provided. Man named Lieutenant James Brigham went missing with supplies meant for the reservation. Changed his name. Built a new life on stolen goods and stolen land. If that's true, the Army will want him more than I do. Watson made more notes. Where's Briggs now? Gone. Cole said. Headed south, probably to Mexico. Left around 3 this morning? I'll wire ahead to the border stations. Watson looked at the assembled men. You're all willing to testify to what you've told me. Yes, sir. They answered almost in unison. Tommy suddenly spoke up, his young voice cracking with emotion. Marshal, what about Maria's people? The water rights Briggs was trying to steal. Watson turned to Maria. The springs on the eastern boundary. My understanding is they've been Apache by treaty since before the territory was organized. They have, Maria confirmed. My people have documents, old ones, from the Spanish land grants and the American treaties. But documents mean nothing when men with guns decide they want what is ours. They mean something when the law stands behind them, Watson said firmly. I'll need to see those documents, make sure they're filed properly with the territorial government. Make it official enough that no one can challenge it again. Clay felt something ease in his chest. Justice, real justice, was taking shape. Not through violence, not through revenge, but through the slow, steady process of truth being officially recognized. What happens to the ranch? Hank asked. Watson surveyed the property. If the land claim is fraudulent, it reverts to territorial control. Might go up for legitimate sale. Might be returned to whoever has rightful claim. He looked at Maria. Could be some of this is Apache land, too. We want only what is ours, Maria said. The springs, the eastern pastures where our ancestors are buried. The rest can go to those who will use it honestly. Wade cleared his throat. Marshal, some of us, we worked here thinking it was legitimate. We got families, needs. Is there any way? You boys willing to work it honest until the court decides? Watson asked. Ranch needs maintaining. Cattle need tending, even if the ownership's in question. We could do that. Wade agreed quickly. Cole and I, maybe Tommy if he's willing. Keep it running, but proper-like. No more schemes, no more harassment of the Apache or anyone else. Clay had an idea. Marshal, if these men are willing to work with Maria's people, share the water rights properly, maybe even hire some Apache cowboys, there could be something good built here. Something that bridges both communities. Watson nodded slowly. That's forward thinking. Morrison, you volunteering to oversee such an arrangement? Clay looked at Maria, who gave him the slightest nod. I might be. If all parties agree. Tommy's face lit up. My sister's husband, he knows cattle. Knows horses, too. If we were hiring Apache cowboys, it would have to be fair, Maria said, her voice carrying quiet authority. Equal pay, equal respect, no more treating my people as less than human. Agreed, Wade said immediately. After what we've done, after what we've been part of, it's the least we can offer. The sun climbed higher, warming the yard where so much cruelty had occurred just days before. But now it felt different, like the light was cleansing as well as illuminating. Rosa brought out coffee and breakfast, insisting everyone eat, even the marshal and his deputies. There's something else, Rosa said quietly to Watson. The women Briggs hurt, not just Maria. There were others, Mexican girls from the villages, Apache women who came to trade. He would make suggestions, make threats. Some left with bruises they didn't come with. Watson's face went stone hard. Names. I need names and dates if you have them. I kept a journal, Rosa admitted. Hidden in my kitchen. I thought someday someone would care enough to listen. Maria reached over and took Rosa's hand. You were brave to write it down, brave to speak it now. As the morning progressed, more truth emerged. The deputies found documents in Briggs's office, some forged, some legitimate, all painting a picture of systematic corruption and abuse. They found the trunk Rosa had mentioned, with a cavalry uniform bearing the name Lieutenant J. Brigham, along with maps and supply lists that matched what had gone missing from Fort Union 7 years ago. He'll hang if we catch him, Watson said grimly. Desertion, theft of military supplies, and now all this. The Army doesn't forgive, and neither does the territorial court. But Clay found he didn't care about Briggs's fate. The man had chosen his path. What mattered was what happened next. Here, with these people who were choosing a different way. By noon, statements had been taken, evidence collected, and plans made. Watson would return to town to file official reports and begin the legal process of sorting out the ranch's ownership. The ranch hands who were leaving shook hands and departed. Some headed to family, others to new opportunities, all carrying the weight of lessons learned. Wade, Cole, and Tommy remained, along with Rosa. They stood in the yard with Clay and Maria, an unlikely alliance formed from the ashes of corruption. We'll need to send word to your people, Clay said to Maria. Let them know it's safe, that things are changing. I'll go myself, Maria said. My grandmother needs to see that I'm well, and the council needs to hear what's been proposed. She looked at Wade. You're truly willing to work alongside Apache cowboys to share this land fairly? Wade met her gaze steadily. Ma'am, after what I've been part of, I'd be honored to try to make things right. Can't undo the past, but maybe we can build a better future. Maria turned to Clay. Will you come with me to speak to the council? If you think it would help, a white man who speaks truth and keeps promises. Yes, it would help. She smiled slightly. Besides, my grandmother wants to meet the man who walked through fire without burning. As they prepared to leave, Tommy approached nervously. Maria, ma'am, would you tell your people that we're sorry, that some of us want to do better? Maria studied his young, earnest face. I'll tell them that some men have remembered their hearts. That's more powerful than any apology. The ranch that had been a symbol of oppression was transforming into something else, a possibility, a bridge, a chance for redemption. As Clay and Maria rode away, they could hear Wade already organizing the remaining men, planning honest work, discussing how to approach the Apache community with their proposal. Your grandmother's dream, Clay said as they rode, about walking through fire. She saw this. Didn't she not just my coming for you, but all of this, the transformation, the possibility of something new? She sees many paths, Maria replied. We chose this one by choosing truth over violence, patience over revenge. She looked at him sideways. You could have come in shooting. Many would have. And what would that have solved? More death, more hatred, more cycles of revenge. Clay shook his head. Your way was better. Truth is its own force. They rode toward the sacred springs, toward Maria's waiting family, toward a future that suddenly seemed full of possibility. Behind them, the ranch stood in the full light of day, no longer hidden by lies, no longer ruled by fear. It would take time to heal all the wounds, to build the bridges that needed building, but the foundation had been laid. Not in violence, but in the simple, revolutionary act of choosing to do right. The sun blessed their journey, and the desert sang with the sound of change. The sacred springs emerged from the desert like a miracle of green in an ocean of sand and sage. Steam rose from the warm pools, creating a perpetual mist that nourished cottonwoods and willows in defiance of the surrounding aridity. Maria's grandmother, Elena Littlefeather, stood at the edge of the largest pool, her weathered face serene as if she had been expecting them at precisely this moment. "Grandmother," Maria called out in Apache, dismounting her horse with fluid grace, "I have returned." Elena's ancient eyes moved from her granddaughter to Clay, studying him with an intensity that seemed to peer straight through to his soul. "The man who walks through fire without burning," she said in accented but clear English. "The keeper of promises." Clay dismounted and stood respectfully, his hat in his hands. "Ma'am, I'm glad Maria is safe." Safe. Elena tasted the word like she was testing its flavor. Such a small word for such a large thing. "Come, both of you. The springs have been waiting." They followed her to a natural shelf of stone worn smooth by countless generations of use. Maria knelt and began unpacking her grandmother's medicine bundle, which she had rescued from the abandoned camp. The old woman's hands trembled slightly as she touched each sacred item: the eagle feathers, the turquoise, the ancient pottery shard that had belonged to her grandmother's grandmother. "Tell me everything," Elena commanded, and Maria did, speaking in a mixture of Apache and English, her voice painting the story of her captivity and liberation. When she described Clay walking into the ranch alone, armed only with truth, Elena nodded as if this confirmed something she had long suspected. "Your dream, grandmother," Maria said. "It was exactly as you saw." "Dreams are maps," Elena replied, her gaze fixed on Clay. "But we must still choose to walk the path they show us." "You could have chosen violence, white man. Many would expect it of you. Your people often speak with guns before words." "Not all of us," Clay said quietly. "My father taught me that a man's word should be his strongest weapon. Your father was wise. Is he living?" "No, ma'am. Died 5 winters past." "Then he lives in you, in the choices you make." Elena stood with difficulty, Maria quickly moving to support her. "There is something that must be done. A ceremony. Not Apache, not white, but something new. For new times require new ways." She led them to the largest pool, where the water bubbled up from deep within the earth, carrying minerals that painted the rocks in shades of copper and turquoise. Other members of Maria's band had gathered, men and women who had heard of Maria's return and come to witness whatever would unfold. "My people," Elena addressed them in Apache, then repeated in English for Clay's benefit. "This man stood between my granddaughter and harm. He spoke truth when lies would have been easier. He chose justice without bloodshed. The spirits have shown me that such actions must be acknowledged." An older man stepped forward, his face marked by years of sun and struggle. "He is white. Whites have brought us nothing but sorrow." "Has he?" Elena challenged. "Or has he brought my granddaughter home? Has he not convinced those who held her to speak truth to the territorial marshal? Has he not proposed that Apache cowboys work alongside white ranchers, sharing water that is rightfully ours?" The man considered this, then stepped back, apparently satisfied. Elena turned to Clay. "You asked my granddaughter a question in the desert night. Ask it again, here, where the spirits can witness." Clay felt the weight of many eyes upon him, but his gaze found only Maria's. She stood beside her grandmother, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her face calm but expectant. He thought of all the years he'd ridden alone, all the nights he'd stared at stars with no one to share his thoughts. He thought of the promise made by these very springs. and how keeping it had led to something larger than either of them had imagined. "Maria Littlefeather," he said, his voice carrying across the water, "I asked you if I could stay, not just visit, but stay, to help build something that bridges our worlds, to work alongside your people and mine, making something better than either could make alone." He paused, gathering courage for the rest. "But that's not the whole question. The whole question is whether you would stand with me in that building, whether what started as a promise could become a partnership. Whether—" He stopped, started again. "Whether you would consider binding your life to mine, as mine is already bound to yours." A murmur ran through the gathered Apache, some surprised, some disapproving. But Elena raised her hand for silence. Maria stepped forward, moving to stand knee-deep in the sacred pool, the warm water swirling around her skirts. "Clay Morrison," she said, her voice formal but warm. "You came for me when I was taken. You freed me without violence. You stood in truth when lies surrounded us. You offered to build bridges between peoples who have been enemies." She paused, and a smile touched her lips. "But more than that, you see me not as Apache or woman or other, but as myself. You see Maria, who knows herbs and horses, who speaks 3 languages, who dreams of a time when children of all colors can learn together." "I see you," Clay confirmed, stepping into the pool to face her, the warm water soaking through his boots. "All of you." "Then my answer is yes," Maria said simply. "Yes to the staying, yes to the building, yes to the binding, yes to tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after." Elena began to speak in Apache, her voice taking on the cadence of ceremony. One of the men translated quietly for Clay. "She says the spirits of the water witness this. The spirits of the earth witness this. The ancestors witness this. What is joined by choice and truth cannot be separated by force or lie." Rosa Martinez appeared at the edge of the gathering, having ridden from the ranch with news. "The marshal has arrested 2 men trying to help Briggs escape," she announced. "And Mr. Wade has sent a message he wants to meet with the Apache Council about the water-sharing agreement." "You see," Elena said, switching back to English, "already the bridges begin to form. But bridges need builders, need tenders, need those who understand both sides." She looked at Clay and Maria. "You will live between worlds. It will not be easy." "The best things rarely are," Clay replied. Over the next hours, as the sun traced its path toward evening, plans took shape with the fluid efficiency of a community that had survived through cooperation. The Apache Council agreed to meet with Wade and the remaining ranch hands. 3 young Apache men expressed interest in working as cowboys if the wages were fair. Maria would serve as translator and mediator, while Clay would oversee the ranch operations to ensure honesty prevailed. "We'll need a place," Maria said to Clay as they sat beside the springs, watching her people prepare for an evening feast. "Not the ranch too many bad memories. Not here, this is sacred ground. Somewhere between. There's that old homestead," Clay suggested. "The abandoned one where I found some supplies. It's got good water, solid buildings that just need repair. Right on the boundary between Apache land and what will probably become open range. A place for crossing over," Maria mused. "A place where both sides can meet as equals." Tommy arrived as the sun was setting, riding hard from the ranch with urgent news. "Marshal Watson says the territorial governor is coming," he said breathlessly. "Wants to see for himself what's happening here. Wants to meet the Apache leaders and maybe," he paused, hardly believing his own words, "maybe establish a new kind of agreement, one that recognizes Apache water rights permanently, in exchange for peaceful cooperation with legitimate settlers." Elena laughed, a sound like wind chimes in the desert. "Change comes like flash floods, sometimes all at once after years of drought. The feast that night was unlike anything Clay had ever experienced. Apache drums mixed with Tommy's harmonica, languages blended and merged, and stories were shared across cultural divides that had seemed insurmountable just days before. Rosa taught Apache women her mother's recipes while they showed her how to prepare traditional medicines. Wade and Cole, who had arrived to pay their respects, sat uncomfortably at first but gradually relaxed as they realized they were being genuinely welcomed. "It won't last," one skeptical Apache man said to Clay. "This peace, this cooperation, your people will want more, always more." "Maybe," Clay acknowledged. "But maybe not. Maybe some of us are tired of taking. Maybe some of us want to build instead." He looked at Maria, who was translating a story for a group of mixed listeners. "And maybe, if we build strong enough foundations, what we create will outlast those who would destroy it." As the night deepened, Elena called Clay and Maria to her. She held an old blanket, woven with patterns that seemed to shift in the firelight. "This was made by my grandmother for her daughter's wedding," she said. "It carries the blessing of all the women who came before. But you, Clay Morrison, have no such gift to give." Clay reached into his saddlebag and pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth, his father's Bible, worn and weather-stained. "This was my father's," he said. "He wasn't much for church, but he believed in the words, especially the parts about justice and mercy, about treating others as you would be treated." He offered it to Maria. "It's not much, but it's all I have of value besides my horse and gun." "Keep your horse and gun," Maria said with a smile. "But this is a true gift. Your father's wisdom to join my grandmother's." Elena nodded approvingly. "Tomorrow, you will go to the abandoned homestead. You will make it livable. Wade has promised lumber from the ranch. Rosa offers furniture from storage. My people will help with the building. By the next full moon, you will have a home, a place where Apache and White can meet, trade, learn from each other." "A school," Maria added suddenly. "We could build a school for all children, Apache, Mexican, White, teaching all languages, all ways." "Ambitious," Clay said, but his eyes were bright with the possibility. "Necessary," Maria corrected. "If we want true peace, we must teach the young that difference isn't danger." The gathering continued late into the night, but eventually, Clay and Maria found themselves alone by the springs, the sound of celebration distant and dreamlike. The moon reflected in the sacred pools, creating a path of silver across the water. "Your grandmother's dream," Clay said. "Did it show this, all of this?" "It showed possibilities," Maria replied. "We chose which one to make real." She leaned against him, a gesture both simple and profound. "You could have been the violent hero of a dime novel. I could have been the vengeful Apache. We chose differently." "We chose better," Clay agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, planning without words, dreaming of the homestead that would become their home, the school that would rise beside it, the children who would learn that courage wasn't about violence but about standing for truth. In the distance, a coyote called, and another answered, and another, until the desert rang with their wild music. "No matter where," Clay said quietly, remembering their old promise. "No matter when," Maria completed. "But now we add something new." "What?" "No matter what comes, we face it together." The sacred springs bubbled their ancient rhythm, unchanged by human struggles but somehow blessed by human hope. Tomorrow would bring work hard, necessary work of building and bridging. There would be setbacks, certainly. Not everyone would accept their union or their vision. But tonight, beneath the vast Arizona stars, beside waters that had flowed since before memory, two people from different worlds had chosen to create a new one. And in that choosing, in that brave act of hope over fear, love over suspicion, truth over comfortable lies, they had already begun to change the world. One heart, one promise, one sacred moment at a time. 6 months later. The schoolhouse stood complete between two worlds, its adobe walls built by Apache and white hands working side by side. Maria taught children of all colors while Clay supervised the shared ranch, where Apache cowboys worked alongside former Briggs men. The Sacred Springs Agreement had become a model for the territory, proof that justice without violence was possible. Wade, transformed from enforcer to advocate, often said, "Family isn't just blood. It's the people who stand with you when truth needs speaking." His gratitude to Maria for her forgiveness had evolved into genuine friendship. Tommy's sister visited weekly, teaching Apache words to white children, while Rosa's kitchen became a gathering place where cultures blended like spices in her stew. Elena Littlefeather, watching her granddaughter's belly grow round with new life, spoke the deep wisdom. Gratitude is the bridge between peoples. When we're grateful for each other's differences instead of fearing them, we become family. The abandoned woman at the fence post had become the heart of a new community, proving that injustice faced with dignity could transform into something beautiful. Have you ever stood up for someone wrongly accused, even when it meant risking your own safety or reputation? What gave you the courage to speak truth when others remained silent?